Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something absolutely fundamental in pediatric practice: sensory perception. Specifically, how kids see and hear.
Yeah, we're tackling alterations in vision and hearing, the common disorders you'll definitely encounter, using a key nursing text as our guide.
Our mission really is to give you that high-yield shortcut through this material. Think anatomy, physiology, common infections, visual issues, hearing problems, treatments.
And the nursing process woven through it all. We want to boil it down to what you truly need for safe, effective pediatric care, less textbook, more practical understanding.
And it's so relevant, isn't it? I mean, sensory perception, just how a child takes in the world, it shapes everything. We'll hit the usual suspects like pink eye and ear infections.
Absolutely. Conjunctivitis, otitis media, very common. But we also need to talk about the quieter thing.
Like what?
Like subtle hearing loss or maybe a refractive error that goes unnoticed. If those aren't caught, the impact on language, on development, can be huge, permanent even.
There's that critical window, right?
Yeah.
Especially with vision and hearing development happening so fast.
Exactly. Early screening, timely intervention, they're not just buzzwords here, they're essential.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Why aren't kids just mini adults when it comes to eyes and ears? Let's start there. The anatomy itself seems to be the issue.
It really is. Those anatomical differences, they're the core reason these problems are so common in kids.
So, vision first. It's amazing how much changes in just the first few years. Babies start out seeing, what is it, 2400?
Yeah, basically seeing shapes and contrast, not details. Really blurry. But it catches up fast. Usually they hit that 20/20 mark by about age 5.
And key things happen early on.
Oh, definitely. The optic nerve isn't fully myelinated, insulated until about 3 months. And binocular vision, using both eyes together effectively, that comes online between 3 and 7 months.
So any disruption during a rapid phase has bigger consequences.
Massive consequences. And there's a crucial physical point the text highlights about susceptibility.
The eyeball size.
Exactly. The infant's eyeball takes up a much larger space in the orbit, proportionally, than in adults.
Which means?
It means it's way more vulnerable to injury. Any eye trauma in an infant, that's an immediate red flag, needs an urgent look by a specialist.
Okay, now let's switch to ears. This explains so much about toddlerhood, the constant ear infections. It's the Eustachian tube, right?
That's the classic pediatric vulnerability. In infants and young kids, these tubes are shorter, they're wider, and here's the kicker, they lie horizontally.
Unlike in adults where they slope downwards.
Right. That adult slope helps drainage and prevents stuff from easily getting into the middle ear. The kid's horizontal tube, not so much.
So it's like a straight shot for bacteria and viruses.
Precisely. After a simple cold, a little upper respiratory infection, those germs can track right from the back of the throat through that horizontal tube, and boom, middle ear infection, acute otitis media.
Makes perfect sense why it's so common. Okay, knowing these vulnerabilities, how do we approach assessment? It's more than just looking for drainage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. History first, always. You need to ask about risk factors. Was the baby premature? Any known genetic issues? History of recurrent ear infections? Family history of vision or hearing problems?
And symptoms might not be obvious.
Right. It might be behavioral. Is the child pulling at their ears, rubbing their eyes excessively, acting differently, or maybe just a fever? You gather all those clues.
And then the physical exam. You mentioned inspection is key for eyes. What are we looking for?
Obvious signs like misalignment, that's strabismus, or nystagmus, that jerky, irregular eye movement. Ptosis, where the eyelid droops and doesn't open fully.
And that light reflex test.
They have corneal light reflex, super important. You shine a light towards their eyes. If the reflection is in the same spot on both pupils, they're aligned.
And if not?
If it's asymmetrical, one eye is likely misaligned strabismus. That needs a referral, especially if it's constant or still there after 4 months old, because it can lead to vision loss in that eye.
Okay. And for ears, the text mentions tympanometry.
Yes, tympanometry is key for checking middle ear fluid or effusion. It measures how well the eardrum moves. If it doesn't move well, that suggests fluid is back there, maybe pushing on it.
Helps diagnose otitis media with effusion or even AOM if it's bulging.
Exactly. And if you see drainage from the ear or eye, culture it. Gotta know what bug you're fighting to choose the right antibiotic.
So once we've assessed, let's talk interventions. Nursing care seems focused on safety and development.
Safety is paramount, especially with visual impairment. If a child can't see well, orient them constantly. The chair is here, the door is over there. Keep pathways clear. And having a parent present provides huge comfort.
Right. And for a child who is blind or severely impaired, how do we reduce fear?
Use your voice. Always identify yourself before you touch them. Hi, it's Nurse Sarah. I'm just going to check your pulse. Name objects. It gives them some control back.
Makes sense. And development, we don't lower expectations.
Absolutely not. You encourage independence in daily activities, dressing, feeding, whatever's age appropriate. Encourage play. Set limits like you would for any child. Structure and routine are reassuring.
Let's touch on common medical treatments. Patching for eye issues always seems a bit strange.
It does feel counterintuitive, but for strabismus or amblyopia lazy eye, you patch the stronger eye.
To force the weaker eye to work.
Exactly. Forces the brain to pay attention to the input from that weaker eye, strengthening its connection. It takes hours a day for weeks or months.
Sounds like a challenge for the toddler.
Oh, it is. Compliance is everything. If they don't wear the patch, the treatment doesn't work, and vision loss can become permanent. The text suggests making it fun, the pirate patch idea. Parental buy-in is crucial.
Okay, and for ears, those PE tubes, pressure equalizing tubes.
Right. For chronic otitis media with effusion, that persistent fluid, a tiny tube is put in the eardrum during a tympanostomy. It lets air in, it keeps pressure equalized, and allows fluid to drain.
What's the key nursing role post-op?
Education. Big time. Parents need to know about dry ear precautions. Usually means keeping bath water out, maybe using earplugs for swimming, especially in lakes or ponds. Depends on the surgeon's preference, but keeping the ear dry is often recommended.
Got it. Okay, let's dive into specific eye disorders. Conjunctivitis pink eye. Seems simple, but the text stresses differentiating the types. How do we do that quickly?
It's a really common scenario, and
Yeah.
you need to nail the cause. Is it bacterial, viral, allergic? The discharge gives big clues.
How so?
Bacterial usually has thick, purulent discharge like pus. Sometimes the eyelids are matted shut in the morning. This needs antibiotic drops or ointment. And its contagious kid needs to stay home from school for 24-48 hours after starting treatment.
Okay, and viral.
Viral tends to be more watery, maybe some mucoid stuff, often comes with cold symptoms. This one's self-limiting supportive care, comfort measures. Antibiotics won't help.
And the third type?
Allergic. The key word here is itching, intense itching. Discharge is often watery or maybe stringy, needs antihistamine eye drops.
And a key teaching point for all types.
Yes. Warn parents against using those over-the-counter redness-reducing drops, like Visine. They work by constricting blood vessels.
But then the vessels can rebound and get even redder, right?
Exactly. Rebound vasodilation makes the eye look worse, and they get trapped using the drops constantly. Bad cycle.
Good tip. What about blocked tear ducts in newborns, nasolacrimal duct obstruction?
Super common. Maybe 20% of newborns have it. Looks like constant tearing, maybe some gooey discharge in the corner of the eye. The good news, 90% resolve on their own by 6 months.
So what do we tell parents?
Teach them the massage technique.
Yeah.
Simple maneuver. Press gently inwards and upwards on the little bump by the inner corner of the eye. The puncta then stroke firmly downwards along the side of the nose. Helps pop open that little membrane blocking the duct.
Okay, let's switch to eye injuries. A kid comes in with a hit to the eye. What's the first thing you check?
Is it an emergency? That's priority one. Look for red flags. Are the pupils reacting abnormally? Is vision affected at all? Can they move their eyes normally in all directions? Any yes there means immediate ophthalmology consult. Don't delay.
If it looks like just a bruise, a black eye.
Simple contusion. Ice is the first step. Apply an ice pack 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off frequently for the first 24 hours. Helps limit the swelling and bruising.
What about a corneal abrasion, a scratch on the eye surface? The text had a specific point about patching.
Ah, yes. Evidence shows patching a simple corneal abrasion is not helpful. It doesn't make it heal faster, doesn't reduce pain significantly, and actually, by blocking vision in that eye, it can increase the risk of accidental injury. So no patch for simple abrasions, maybe antibiotic ointment, but no patch.
Interesting. Now, the more serious visual disorders, amblyopia, lazy eye. The text calls it the most common cause of vision loss if untreated.
It really is. It happens when the brain essentially starts ignoring the input from one eye, maybe because it's misaligned, strabismus, or has a significant refractive error, needs glasses. If the brain doesn't get a clear picture, it suppresses that eye.
And the treatment we discussed.
Strengthening that weaker eye. Patching the good eye, or sometimes using atropine eye drops in the good eye. Atropine blurs the vision in the good eye, forcing the brain to use the weaker one. Again, compliance is key.
Then there are the really serious congenital issues. Infantile glaucoma.
Yeah, caused by high pressure inside the eye. Often presents with unusually large-looking, maybe cloudy eyes, tearing light sensitivity. This needs surgery.
And post-op care is intense.
Very. Protecting that surgical site is critical. Eye patches, maybe shields, and often elbow restraints for infants or toddlers to stop them from rubbing the eye. Bed rest might be needed initially to keep that intraocular pressure down.
And congenital cataracts, cloudiness in the lens.
Also needs surgery, and urgently. The best outcomes happen if that cataract is removed before the baby is 3 months old. Delay impacts vision development significantly. Key diagnostic sign nurses look for: an absent red reflex when you shine a light in the eye.
And when caring for any visually impaired child, the text mentions blindisms.
Yes, those repetitive, self-stimulatory behaviors like eye pressing, body rocking, maybe head weaving. They can be ways the child explores their world or copes with lack of visual input. We need to understand them, ensure safety, and gently redirect towards other ways of exploring or playing.
Okay, let's wrap up with ear disorders and hearing. We talked about AOM, acute otitis media. What's the current thinking on treatment?
There's a big push for antibiotic stewardship. For uncomplicated AOM in kids over a certain age, watchful waiting for 48-72 hours is often recommended. See if it resolves without antibiotics to reduce resistance.
So nursing focuses a lot on prevention.
Huge role. Educate parents about breastfeeding, it's protective. Avoiding secondhand smoke exposure is critical. And making sure kids get their immunizations, especially the pneumococcal vaccine, Prevnar, which protects against a common AOM bacteria.
What about OME, otitis media with effusion? Fluid without the acute infection.
This is the sneaky one. The fluid can hang around for weeks or months after an AOM clears up. No pain, maybe no fever, but there's fluid behind the eardrum.
And the problem is?
Hearing loss. It's usually a conductive loss, and it fluctuates. But for an infant or toddler learning to talk, that fluctuating hearing can seriously mess with language development. It's a silent threat to speech.
So how is OME managed?
Often watchful waiting again, with hearing checks every few months. But if it persists for, say, 3 months, or if the child already has speech delays or other risk factors, they need a referral to ENT and audiology. Might need PE tubes eventually.
Okay, one more ear issue. Otitis externa, swimmer's ear.
Right, infection of the outer ear canal. Classic sign. Severe pain when you wiggle the outer ear, the pimina, or push on that little bump in front, the tragus. Doesn't hurt with middle ear infections usually.
Causes?
Usually bacterial Pseudomonas is common, especially from contaminated water. Prevention is key. Keep ear canals dry after swimming. Sometimes using drops with rubbing alcohol and vinegar can help restore the normal pH, but only use that mix in a healthy ear canal. It'll sting like crazy if it's already inflamed.
And underlying all these ear issues is the potential for hearing loss.
Which is devastating for development. Hearing is functional at birth. Any impairment, especially early on, severely impacts speech and language. We talk about levels of loss. Mild, moderate, severe, profound over 80 decibels is profound.
And types of loss.
2 main types. Conductive loss is when sound waves are blocked from reaching the inner ear, like with OME or earwax buildup. Sensorineural loss involves damage to the inner ear, the cochlea, or the auditory nerve. Could be from certain infections, ototoxic medications, genetic factors, maybe severe jaundice like kernicterus.
Nursing care for hearing loss.
It's all about supporting communication. Whatever the family chooses, American Sign Language, ASL, cued speech, an oral approach focusing on listening and speaking, we support that. We facilitate access to resources and crucial safety teaching about hearing aids. Those little button batteries are a huge choking and aspiration risk for small kids.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together. Pediatric anatomy, those horizontal tubes, those proportionally larger eyes really dictates the risks.
Absolutely. And assessment isn't just looking for infection, it's checking reflexes like the corneal light reflex, observing behavior, doing tympanometry.
And the urgency is clear. Time is vision with things like amblyopia. Time is speech with untreated OME. Early intervention is everything.
Right. And the nurse's central screening, educating parents on everything from eye drop administration to the importance of follow-up, connecting physical issues to developmental outcomes. It aligns perfectly with national goals like the Healthy People Objectives for early hearing detection.
So here's a thought to leave our listeners with, connecting that anatomy directly to practice. Given what we know about the infant's horizontal Eustachian tube, making reflux into the middle ear easier, what specific advice would you give a parent about how to position their baby during feeding bottle or breast to minimize that risk? How does anatomy inform that simple piece of guidance?
That's a great clinical question to ponder, thinking about gravity and that tube placement.
Exactly, something practical to apply. Thanks for diving deep with us today into these critical pediatric sensory issues. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next dive.